Welcome back, and you can find out more about the recycling partnership at our partner hub. Up next, we have another panel discussion. This one's focusing on integrating circularity into your climate strategy. We've got leaders today from Ralph Lauren, International Paper, Rheaply, and it's led by Kristen Lang of Ceres. Over to you, Kristen.
Thanks so much, Ed. Thanks everyone for joining us today for this session, integrating your circular plans into your climate strategy. I'm really excited about this conversation today. As Ed said, my name is Kristen Lang. I am the Senior Program Director of the company network at Ceres. We are a nonprofit advocacy organization, and we work at the nexus of the corporate and investment and advocacy communities, really working with these critical audiences to be able to advance sustainable business leadership by embedding sustainability into the very fabric of the way that corporations and investors make their decisions. And one of the core issues that we focus on at Ceres is climate change, and explicitly looking at the strategies and the actions that are going to be needed over the next year, 5 years, 10 years to be able to realize a zero emissions future. And I think as we think about that, as we think about the tactics that are needed, one of the conversations that is increasingly coming up is circularity. As we really look back at the history of how we use materials across the world, globally, the economy has been based on a linear model, one in which resources are extracted from the earth, used to make products, and then at the end of that, discarded when those products are no longer wanted. But as we think about the impacts of that and the 110 million metric tons of emissions of waste in the US in 2019 alone, it's really clear to all of us, I think, that it's no longer serving us, and that model needs to be addressed and really changed if we're able to look at that, the impacts that that has in terms of our climate crisis that we're facing. So that's particularly why I'm happy to be having this conversation today, because we're combining those topics of thinking about climate strategies, what that means from the perspective of companies across different sectors, and how circular strategies need to be factored into that. So we're going to explore that today. We're going to be talking to two very different companies from different sectors and how they're realizing the benefits of designing circular economy principles into their business strategies. And we're also going to be talking about how technology solutions and better data management are going to be critical parts of helping to move the market towards circularity. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists. I am joined today by Halide Alagöz, who is the Chief Product and Sustainability Officer at Ralph Lauren. Also joined by Sophie Beckham, the Chief Sustainability Officer at International Paper, and with Garry Cooper, CEO of Rheaply. So we're going to dive into our discussion now. I'm going to have each of these folks, as they jump in on their first question, kind of explain a little bit more about their perspective, where they sit within their companies, but also want to say that we welcome all of you to offer your questions as you have them throughout the discussion today. We're going to be monitoring those. We're going to take a look at the questions. And as we go through the conversation today, I've got my questions prepared that I want to be able to hit on with these guys, but we're going to be integrating questions from all of you so that we make this more of a participant oriented conversation as we go through our session time. So to kick things off, this is actually a question I want to pose to both Halide and Sophie. The momentum behind this call for more ambitious and comprehensive climate strategies, and really what we're seeing and how that come out in the way of more ambitious corporate and investor commitments, it's really just growing at a fairly rapid pace. And we're seeing that come to fruition in particular over the last several months. But I think one of the things, and I alluded to this in my introductory comments, that we haven't heard emerging as clearly yet is really how pivotal circular business models and strategies are going to be part of those commitments and really realizing those commitments in the years ahead. So maybe Halide, we'll start with you, really thinking about, how is your company thinking about this in terms of your strategies, your commitments to address climate risk, and how is circularity really going to be a part of your path to get there?
Sure, thank you. Kristen, I want to start with giving a little bit of a framework of where we see circularity within our sustainability and citizenship strategy. At Ralph Lauren, we believe we have a unique approach to sustainability because our brand is built on the idea of timelessness. creating things that are meant to be loved and worn for many years and passed on to the next generations. So 2 years ago, we launched our citizenship and sustainability strategy, which we named Design the Change. And it sets our roadmap around creating timeless style, protecting the environment, and championing better lives. And building on Design the Change, using various elements in it, this year we launched our circularity strategy, and it focuses on 3 pillars: designing for circularity, creating circular consumer experiences, and advancing a circular product economy. So as I try to outline, we really see a huge connectivity between circularity and our overall sustainability strategy. And just to share a few examples of how we see they are connected, how it supports science-based GHG reduction targets that we have, or our overall long-term climate goals. 2 specific examples will be raw materials and our manufacturing and production processes. When we mapped out our GHG emissions, we found that the sourcing of the virgin raw materials covers 14% of our footprint. And so increasingly sourcing raw materials such as cotton, leather, grown with regenerative practices support circular and climate strategies, or transitioning into recycled materials, which eliminates a significant portion of GHG emissions for our key materials like cotton, polyester, wool, and cashmere, really contributes to the reduction of that footprint. And in addition to raw materials, like I said, production processes and manufacturing processes covers close to 45% of our footprint. So we are working on a lot of innovation on the way we dye our products, our cotton, our polyester products. Recently, we launched our Color on Demand program, which focuses on how to dye cotton in a more sustainable way. And that has the potential to reduce the level of energy used associated with both sourcing, but also the treatment of the water of those dyeing processes. And finally, to wrap and connect both of them, the recycling infrastructure, how to connect the recycled materials to those responsible practices of production, will really enable us scale the existing practices better for the future.
So fascinating, and so much to unpack there, and we're going to come back to you to kind of dive into some more of that. But first, I want to go to you, Sophie, just to have you give kind of an overview of how you're thinking about circularity at International Paper.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. I'm thrilled to be here with Halide and Garry, so thanks for convening us for this. Actually, Halide left that in a perfect segue, talking about recycling of the product. So those of you who are not quite as familiar with International Paper as you may be with Ralph Lauren, we are a global producer of renewable fiber-based packaging, pulp, and paper products, the kind that you might still be stockpiling in your basement since the epidemic or the pandemic of the last year. So we likewise have sort of a unifying global citizenship framework and sustainability strategy where we've baked in circularity, and our view is to 2030. And circularity is really a concept that kind of wraps around everything we do. Actually, we have a naturally circular value chain, which has been an interesting journey for us to say, okay, our products come from renewable fiber-based resources, from sustainably managed forests, and we have an extremely high recovery and recycling rate for at least paper and packaging at the end of use of our products. So where can we embed circularity principles outside of what we have sort of traditionally done as an industry over time? And I think it's been a fantastic exercise for us to think about, in addition to embedding circularity in this value chain, how do we ensure that that work is contributing to decarbonization and this low carbon future that we are all getting behind. So I think, as Halide mentioned, we also have a commitment around greenhouse gas emissions reductions in our manufacturing, and really looking at how the three are sourcing of a renewable-based fiber, a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in our manufacturing, and then finally, really the sustainable solutions that our products provide. How do we tie that all together? How does circularity wrap around all of it? And one thing I want to tee up for a later conversation is really, how are we taking action on this front? Because it's certainly not alone. We are working with partners, and we recognize really to leverage the benefits of this work and to be able to find new solutions and uncover new ways of working, we need collaboration and we need partners. So I'll speak more about that later.
Yeah, fantastic point. And I think that piece of collaboration is one that each of you are likely going to have something to say about as to how that's going to be a part of how you think about this over the next several years in particular. Garry, I want to give you a chance to introduce Rheaply to this audience who may not know as much about the organization and what you guys do. And in doing that, would love for you to maybe provide a little bit of insight into something that we're seeing at Ceres very often in both our work with our company and investor partners. And that is, as we're seeing more of these climate commitments come out from different companies, there's also an increased skepticism around their validity, kind of what actually is meaningful progress in terms of disclosure and KPIs and being able to create more comparability. But in that same vein, historically, communication around circularity has also had that same level of skepticism. There's been a real challenge around how do companies communicate what this looks like? How do you actually make that connection between circular business strategies with meaningful data and comparable data, and connect that back to some of your larger strategies and your impacts that you're having on issues like climate. So first introduce Rheaply, and then we'd love to get your perspective as a developer of these kind of software solutions, how you're working with your clients to develop and really measure against those more meaningful metrics to be able to connect circularity with climate.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me. I'm like super fanboys of Halide and Sophie from the cheap seat side. This is an absolute pleasure. So Rheaply is a technology company based in Chicago, and simply we just help companies scale reuse. So there's been a lot of focus in the market around recycling solutions. I don't need to state how recycling in the state of the world, especially in the United States, have gone. And so we've kind of just stuck our flag in saying that actually reuse is a big answer to a lot of the woes that we have, both in the corporate space, but also at the consumer level. And to that point, what we specifically do, the canonical definition of circular economy, posited by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is three-pronged. So really what we try to help, and Halide kind of really talked a lot about like product innovation. That's one of the prongs. And one of the things that we kind of do at Rheaply though, is we really focus on the kind of keeping items in use as long as possible. So that kind of reuse cycle. And we kind of do that with a funny mixture of a technology suite that kind of acts as an asset management system, but also kind of like an internal marketplace for a wide-ranging organization. And then when those assets aren't needed internally for those organizations, they can share them to their community at large, whether that's universities, nonprofits, whether that's other businesses that they're cooperating with. So the end of the life of the asset within a company doesn't have to be its death to the landfill. It goes on to another organization who can use it. And so we power that at Rheaply with our customers and partners. I love your question about that data and about how we measure. I probably could write a thesis about that. So I'll try to compress it into like maybe a 20-second soundbite. I think it's hard. And the reason that it's hard is because we're doing two things at once, right? Or at least two things. The first thing we're doing, we're trying to actually get our businesses aligned with climate pledges from our respective countries so that we can all meet our 2050 obligations to kind of keep going as we currently are. So we're working hard, and at the very same time, we're like, how's it going, right? So we're having to come up with KPIs, we're having to come up with new ways of even measuring things while we're implementing solutions. So what we try to do with our customers and partner is kind of like take that on and say, hey, what is problematic today that you know? How much are you sending to the landfill? How much, not in our space, but I know a lot of other spaces, how much water are you using? How much energy you're pulling in? What goal can you get to reasonably in 3 to 5 years? And how can technology help you? And then as we're going along, we ask questions like, what would be another metric to pulling out some of the other value that's being had? So one example at Rheaply is we're going to be working with a couple of our partners to establish the first reuse index, right? There's currently not, to my knowledge, some type of overarching number that kind of lets you know if a product can be used more than once or twice or 3 times, but that'd be super helpful for sustainability leaders like Sophie and Halide and procurement leaders So when they're purchasing things, if they knew like, hey, on average, this could last 2 or 3 times versus competitor, that'd be super helpful from a reuse and circular economy perspective. So while we're trying to help organizations reduce their waste, we're also trying to think through how do we help you make better decisions with improved metrics at the same time.
Oh gosh, I could probably talk to you about this piece for at least another couple hours. I think one thing I want to draw out of what you're sharing there is around kind of the level of quality, and I think also another piece I want to tie this back to is some work that you guys are doing at Ralph Lauren Halide, which is around kind of the need to ensure that there's an elevated sense and really investment around the elevated sense in terms of quality of materials, and also kind of some of the work that you guys are doing around engaging people from across the business in terms of educating them on how these can make these materials can make their way back into your products, really being able to engage people that are impacting design, impacting the consumer experience, so that we can actually be in a position where you're able to implement some of these circular solutions and really bring them to scale. So I wonder if you can maybe share a little bit more about what that looks like internally at Ralph Lauren, and kind of how you're thinking about this from a kind of more of a practical standpoint.
To your point, one thing we have to make sure is the quality of those alternative materials or processes will live up to our own standards of the high quality of Ralph Lauren products. And so far, our timelessness concept has been defined by the intergenerational desirability of our products. So you can actually, take it down to the next generation and gift it to your kids and to your grandkids, which comes with the requirement of durability, the quality. It has to stand those years, and it has to really live with high quality along those years. But now what we are also adding or redefining to timelessness is how to encapsulate the circular design principles. Because what we believe in is neither sustainability nor quality or circularity is an afterthought. It's not that you design and create a product and then later someone else looks into it to make it more sustainable or circular. So it is really critical for us to embed designing through the lens of sustainability and circularity at the very beginning stage. And that integration is really critical for us to integrate into each stage of design, product development, sourcing, production, and all these processes to create innovative products with timelessness, authenticity, and quality at their heart. And this really requires us to make sure our teams are properly equipped and educated, because it's also evolving. Every day we're learning something else. Where there are solutions, we are adopting existing solutions. Where the solutions do not exist, we lean on innovation to find those high quality recycled materials. So our design, production, and merchandising teams are now receiving annual training on sustainability, circular, and responsible design. We are creating libraries of references, certain spaces in our offices or libraries where they can go and see those materials and touch those materials. And now it's turning into an e-learning on sustainable product to our design, production, merchant teams globally. And now we will also expand it to other parts of the organization. And as I said, what is really critical to keep in mind, like Garry said, we don't have all the solutions in place. None of us have all the answers. We're learning, we're failing, we're learning, and we're adapting. It's important to keep those education materials updated with those learnings and to encounter those challenges along the way and still remain committed to working collectively within our cross-functional organizations, but also I think we'll talk about it later with our peers and other stakeholders in the industry.
And maybe Kristen, just to take a cue from Halide, one of the things that Rheaply did as a part of Earth Day, just passed, is we launched what we call the Reuse Initiative. In fact, if people want to learn a little bit more about it, you can just go to Rheaply.com/reuse. And because we do think there is an education for us all as sustainability stakeholders and leaders, but also for the market, right? It's not enough to say, this is wrong. It's like, why, what can be better? And so what we decided to do as a part of the Reuse Initiative is to actually publish a very detailed action plan whether you're employed, whether you're a sustainability leader, you can go to this Rheaply.com/reuse, and we have a 20-page deck of how to make reuse better at your company that we're just giving out to the market, because it's not just about Rheaply winning. I really want to stay on this planet in the way that we currently live. Well, I want to go outside, and so I think that's super important, because people are busy. We just went through a pandemic, and if you're trying to work with sustainability leaders and procurement leaders or financial leaders or operating leaders who might not have all the training that Halide and Sophie have, and myself, around sustainability and circular economy, you need to get people up to speed so they can get bought into the same things that we think. And so we try to make a good faith effort to kind of help the market with reuse, at least.
That is really important, Garry. We also recently made our innovation around color on demand with the 4 partners that we innovated with. It's now open source to the industry. Everybody can go and learn and adapt it according to their own processes, but sharing those learnings, not only within your 4 walls, but expanding it to the industry, even to the next generation. When we launched our Earth Polo, I think it was 2 years ago, we also used an education material with physical samples of shredded plastic bottles and how it turns into polyester yarn and how it turns into a product. And we shared it with our employees, kids and families on our family days in the offices. So the next generation can also come, touch and learn how a water bottle actually turns into an amazing high quality product.
I love that. I love that. And I think one of the things that's super interesting about what you're talking about is this need to kind of not only educate and inspire people, but I think that also needs to translate into the way that you're engaging with your consumers as well, in that consumer behavior change. And this is actually bringing in a question from the audience participation. So I want to encourage people to keep asking these questions because I'm marking them down as we go. So one of the questions that we got was around how do you accelerate consumer behavior change, recognizing that there's only so much you can do as a business in terms of offering more product. You also need to get that product back. And you also need to be shifting the way in which the market is behaving in terms of their consumption patterns, but also how they're engaging with you in that circular chain. So I wonder, Halide, maybe from the perspective of the kind of B2C perspective in terms of direct consumer, and then Sophie, if you wanted to jump in on the B2B side of things, I think we might have some interesting conversation here. So Halide, do you want to first speak to the consumer engagement?
You're right. I mean, it's so important to engage with the consumers, but what we also look into that from 2 different lenses or 2 parallel lenses. One is making sure there's a clear value proposition for the consumer to be engaged with those activities. That comes with learning, sharing the why, but making sure it comes with full integrity, full transparency, just to avoid the greenwashing that goes around the industry, maybe with positive intent, but with lack of information. So we have really taken our time to make sure our information, our processes, our certifications have been credible to start talking to our consumers and sharing it with our consumers, which we will continue to increase the level of that sharing with the consumers. And the second lens is, how can we as companies remove obstacles from their journey to support circular systems? Today, it's not necessarily easy for a consumer to be a part of a circular system, whether in the form of a re-commerce or returns or recycling or upcycling the products. That's why the 3rd prong of our circularity strategy, which is really focusing on how do we create those consumer experiences and how do we remove obstacles from their journey to be a part of the solution, I think is really critical.
Yeah, and I can tag on to that. I think we've used this word a few times, but I do think that there's so much that Garry and Halide have already mentioned around sort of education and the circularity journey. And on this particular topic, I think we've seen some really interesting opportunities and impacts of the past year. So if I give kind of 2 concrete examples, both of, how do we seek out these solutions that can help motivate consumer behavior, but also looking at how do we work with other people to unlock those. The first is really that as Garry alluded to, he hasn't left his home in, you know, a little over a year, but I bet he's ordered a lot from some of our favorite online retailers. And guess what? Those come in renewable fiber-based boxes. Well, a year ago, more than a year ago, a lot of our recovery and recycling of that material was going through some of the large big box store retailers, right? Because we were all going to those stores when we needed something. So there's been this big shift to e-commerce. And what that means is that consumers, the end consumer, all of us at our homes are facing a lot more material that should be, can be recycled, can be reincorporated into this sort of naturally circular value chain. However, not every municipality is set up to address this solution or address this challenge. And so I think we have been really looking at, with partners such as the Recycling Partnership, who just was on a preceding panel here, really looking at what are the right solutions in the right places, and more critically, who are the people who need to have a seat at that table. It's not just you know, an international paper and a convener. It's those key stakeholders in the municipalities, the people who are really on the ground every day, those who are facing challenges in their communities, to sort of bring to bear, how is it that our community can contribute to positive impact in this space. So I think that's one example of both how we're addressing and looking at solutions for kind of critical issues. Another space that I think is even more interesting and has a tremendous potential is, for us, we make fluff pulp for diapers and hygiene products. This is sort of a space that does not currently have a broad, you know, scaled recovery solution, right? Most of those products go to landfills. There's a lot of really interesting innovation going on in this space, and we need partners to be able to work together to say, well, what do we do about this? So we recently became a member and are formalizing our membership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which has been mentioned several times. And hopefully with partners like that, we can get at this piece about innovation, because I think we need innovation, as Halide really mentioned, in the design phase, really in the production phase, and then at the end of use of the product. And that end of use of the product, that is a true kind of multi-stakeholder space to advance this work. And the last example I would give about collaboration, because I think this is really a theme that I know we all get behind. You know, collaboration is so important to push us, to challenge us, to help us think divergently, sometimes to make us really uncomfortable, and also to experience breakthroughs. And we talk a lot about getting to scale in the sustainability world, but that scale piece is so interesting because it means something different to everyone, and probably something different for every part of the value chain. So when we think about getting to scale with partners, one place we're really focused on is the forest landscape. This is the source of all of our sustainably managed fiber. It is our most important raw material. We know we have to work with partners on conservation, restoration, and initiatives that really ensure that that resource is going to be there for future generations. Just like Garry, I want to live a long time, and I want my kids to be able to go outside and enjoy all of the things, the benefits that forests provide. So looking at that piece of it, and not sort of in isolation, but as a part of the value chain, and looking at who do we collaborate with to really develop positive impact and outcomes in that landscape that contribute to our climate strategy, that focus on the natural climate solution of forests and that resource. For an international paper, just like maybe cotton is for Halide or other raw materials, for us, that is really a key focus and strategic priority. So we've been working with the Nature Conservancy on natural climate solutions in the form of different logging practices that can happen in forests to promote carbon sequestration. And we're also working with the World Wildlife Fund on developing science-based targets for forests, which is a similar umbrella and concept that we have been looking at, and all of us working with the science-based targets for climate. So that was a mouthful, but there's so much good stuff here. I wish I could keep going. So happy to unpack any of that.
Oh, yeah, so many good examples. And I think this piece that you've been pulling on, and what you were able to really elucidate with those examples, is the critical importance of collaboration, but in very different forms, in terms of how you need to think about it from a community level, from a larger systems level. And Halide, one of the things that you were touching on briefly is kind of what that collaboration needs to look like within the industry. I think the apparel industry has been a particularly interesting case study of being an industry that's been more open to open sourcing. And I remember years ago, this is probably 10, 12 years ago, I remember speaking with Hannah Jones, the former CSO at Nike, and she said, you know, we don't compete on our shoe boxes. Like we shouldn't be hiding these as state secrets in terms of, you know, how to be able to improve the sustainability of our packaging or certain material innovations. And I think what you all have done at Ralph Lauren in terms of being able to open source your technologies to benefit the industry as a whole and really lift all boats. I think that is a critical piece that other industries really can learn from and embrace in terms of really deciding where you're going to be competitive and where can you be collaborative to be able to really shift the market. So I wonder if you have any kind of other thoughts to share on that from your perspective around kind of different forms of collaboration or really what that industry collaboration could mean.
To your point, I think you summarized it very well. Our industry is more known for exclusivity, secrecy, you know, all these things that comes with design. But when it comes to sustainability, what I'm really proud of our industry, of our peers, of our stakeholders is there's very high levels of collaboration. Our mission, not only for Ralph Lauren, but I can proudly say for many people, many of our peers in the industry or stakeholders in the industry is searching for good together rather than doing less harm on our own. And we all know this problem is too big for any one of us to tackle on our own. And what we are trying to do is to find those different collaboration moments and opportunities to address certain issues. For example, many of us are members of Fashion Pact, where we have selected a few priorities with big impact on climate, on biodiversity, on oceans, and we are holding hands to create solutions together. Or within US, all members of AAFA are coming together and understanding where we should lean in as US brands to create a bigger impact, a better impact on our footprint. And these creating such alliances offer every one of us, all organizations, a long-term benefit by combining more productive ways of doing things while we are all designing systemic change. We all work on projects that have a clear value proposition for the consumer, but like I said, also removing obstacles or creating opportunities on those recycling systems, like Sophie has explained how e-com has changed our interaction with the consumers and what consumer ends up with to be a part of the solution. When we all innovate, we have to partner with other companies. We have two good examples of that. For our circularity strategy, we are partnering with C2C, Cradle to Cradle organization, and top 5 iconic Ralph Lauren products will have C2C certification. This is nothing we could do on our own. We need the know-how, the experience of the C2C organization. We need our suppliers to agree to be a part of this. And I'm very proud to say all of our strategic and key partners are very willing to really enhance their processes and the way they approach sustainability and environmental and social issues in their factories. The second example is how do we generate high quality, 100% recycled cotton, for example. That solution doesn't exist in the industry today. There is recycled cotton, but you have to mix it with regular cotton to achieve a soft, nice hand of your cotton products. So we have invested in a company called Natural Fiber Welding, which have found a new way, an innovative way to do 100% recycled cotton, but turned into a product that is equally soft and nice and high quality as a regular cotton. And while we're doing it, we also partnered with certain technology platforms to build our digital product ID platforms. By the end of this fiscal year, 100% of Polo products will be coming out with a digital ID, a QR code in the neck label, where you can scan and learn about the product, about the sustainable components of the product, but also you stay connected with us when we are designing the next life cycles of the product. So our relationship with the consumer doesn't end when they buy from us. It actually continues through the life of the product, which we believe is quite a long time for a Ralph Lauren product. And all of these really requires deep partnerships, deep collaboration, open sources. How do we scale and where ambitions actually meet actions? And we are all walking the talk. So I'm really proud of the collaborations and partnerships we have built in our industry and across industries as well.
So many multiple benefits of what you're describing there. Garry, I want to come to you on this because collaboration is a lot of what you guys need, and really the systems change is what you're trying to achieve at Rheaply. So I'd love for you to kind of reflect on this as well, and even within the construct of the larger systems change in terms of what's needed to address the broader climate crisis.
Yeah, again, I'm happy to write another article on this one. If we take just the last 6 months, I think people would have thought, oh, you know, I can get anything in 2 days from Amazon. And then COVID happened, and it showed how fragile the forward logistics of our global supply chain really, really is. We, Rheaply, actually were able to take our core technology. We work with Mayor Lightfoot here in Chicago, and we created a local PPE marketplace so that vendors who had PPE, who weren't using it, like tattoo parlors or veterinarians or people who were just producing it, could actually help small nonprofits and businesses reopen. So when I think about mapping reverse logistics of everything, there are some questions to be asked because we still haven't even figured out forward logistics in some ways. But again, the clock is ticking. So we again have to work and deliver some solutions while we're also improving on those solutions at the same time. So as I think about what Halide and Sophie said, one of the things that's super important to me, and I actually proffered an opinion piece on this, adding a fourth principle to the circular economy, and I love you, Ellen MacArthur, we're also a part of the organization, is connecting the value chain. I don't think you can get to circulating anything, whether it be something for manufacturing, whether it be a post-consumer product or packaging, until everyone is on some type of easy to use platform for that to actually happen. And so what we've really tried to do at Rheaply is kind of take that to the next level and help organizations like the ones that are represented here connect back to their suppliers, connect up into their community, so that when things that they are producing are no longer at the end of life and no longer of need of them, they can either easily go back to the supplier or they can go into the community where they can be used by another organization. And if you think about that by company, then you start to have a working network where you can actually move things around or at least have the visibility to them. One of my favorite quotes is from Kate Brandt, who's the current Global Chief Sustainability Officer at Alphabet and Google, where she said, waste is a data problem. And we completely believe that at Rheaply. So the idea is really to bring visibility to the things that are available in our systems and then help consumers, whether they be an actual at-home consumer, whether they be a business consumer, make better procurement and disposition decisions. But I really think we have to connect our value chain across the board before we can really get to the systems level change that I think we all hope that we can have.
I think the solutions that you're talking about, Garry, in terms of being able to connect major users of materials and do that across the full value chain, so you're connecting into the communities, into the small businesses that may not even know where to start, how to have access to those materials. I mean, I think the solutions you're talking about are really massive in terms of the potential implications.
And that's also one of my loves of the circular economy is not just what it does for Rheaply or it might do for Ralph Lauren or International Paper, but also what it could do for that Black business owner who was hurt in the pandemic and is looking for stock to restart their small manufacturing organization. They could take that from organizations that aren't even using it anymore, or from organizations that are closing down an office. So much office supplies that can go to students who are learning at home. And so those are some of the projects that we're working with some of our partners, but they just make sense, right? The circular economy is just it makes sense thing. So to me, it's always been not a question of the what. It's been a question of the how. How do we do this at a level that has an impact that attracts more organizations to kind of join the circular party? And I don't think you get away from that without scaling technology.
No, fantastic. So you all sit in very different parts of this value chain as well, and in the solution space. I want to see if you guys have questions for each other that you might want to throw out there.
Well, I have a question. I have a question because I am a fanboy of these two. So my question is really, I sit as a CEO here at Rheaply. I'm really our chief sustainability and chief cheerleader, I like to say. But I wonder, as you think about your experience and your careers and your networks in sustainability leadership in the corporate space, how the role of the chief sustainability officer or the VP of sustainability in some companies, if it has evolved. And when I started Rheaply, I would say a lot of the people that we would talk to who were sustainability leaders were almost internal consultants, had very small teams, very small budgets, quite frankly, very small leeway. But now, with every business trying to get to net zero something, the sustainability has such purview across the organization. So I'm wondering, have you seen an evolution in the empowerment of these officers and leaders, or is it still stagnated?
I can kick that off and then I'll turn it to Halide. I know she's got some good reflections. I think this is a great question. So I can just share really quickly. I'm the first Chief Sustainability Officer for International Paper. My position was created in January of 2020, which was simultaneous with the launch of our next decade of goals, our Vision 2030 goals. My buzzword for now and probably forever is integration. Really, I would like to put myself out of a job, because the whole idea is, as you said, if our starting point was sort of small teams and low visibility and consultant work, our job is to make sure that we don't have a pure sustainability strategy that sits outside of the work we do every day, but we have an approach to get to integrate all of these important operating principles into our strategic plans, our facility plans, our people plans, so that we are, as a business, delivering sustainable outcomes. And that, for me, when we sort of get to that point where it feels like that integration is natural, then I'll go and come and work for you, Garry. So I think that there is a tremendous opportunity for a CSO to lead, but ultimately, I would also like to suggest that the CSO is really a support function. When there are questions or when there are opportunities to guide, to course correct, et cetera. In the meantime, I think the creation of my role was a very intentional move by our CEO, whose job I'm not seeking and will not be giving him a run for his money. But in order to say, this is so important to our company that we want someone to lead this work, and then we'll see where it goes from here. So I turn to Halide.
Thank you. I think just to build on what you say, I've been in the industry close to 30 years, and this role has evolved. It started as auditors, controllers, again, people who fix wrongdoings that the other part of the organization did. And recently it really shifted into an integration model, because, like I said, you cannot control or correct something that is done by somebody else. The whole idea is to go all the way back to the inception of whatever it is that you are producing, either a product or a service, and really think and design that through the lens of sustainability. So integration is key, not only for Ralph Lauren, but I think everyone, whatever business you're in, you have to make sure sustainability is really integrated into everything you do. And it's actually reflected in my title. I'm Chief Product and Sustainability Officer. So my job is through the product lifecycle, from its inception all the way that it reached the consumer, design everything from the process to the product through the lens of sustainability. And I feel extremely empowered due to both the clarity of what sustainability means for Ralph Lauren and timelessness of our brand and our products, but also how Ralph, our board, our CEO, our CFO, everybody is really engaged and empowered the role to create the right roadmaps and to set really challenging North Star goals, even for things where we don't have the answers. And when I heavily rely on is the deep passion and commitment from 20,000+ employees globally all around the world. Everybody is passionate to be a part of the solution. Everybody wants to do right. And to Sophie's point, that's the consultant piece that you have to keep in your organization, because the world evolves, you learn, you really need people who brings that information to the organization and helps everyone with that integration.
And one thing I'll add, Kristen, is that where we've had I think the easiest wins when it comes to recruiting has been people who come from, working in banking and now just want to get behind and try to figure out how to help fight climate change. So I actually think that organizations who more empower their chief sustainability leader, but also embed that in the JDs for recruiting, talk about it from an employee engagement perspective, I think you're also going to see a lot of the quote market talent float to or kind of drift to organizations who do empower people like Halide and Sophie to be making strategic company decisions and not just bandaging things that might have happened in the past.
Couldn't agree more. There's lots of nodding going around. So we have 1 minute left, which is blowing my mind that this conversation has gone so fast. I want to give each of you kind of like 10 seconds to kind of give your one thing of, from a systems change perspective, kind of bigger thing. What is in the next 5 years? What do you want to see happen that you think will really truly unlock our ability to drive circular strategies, kind of in like the Twitter? So Sophie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. That's really tough. I'm just going to focus on something I mentioned earlier, which is the natural climate solutions opportunity that we have. So when we're using materials that have a renewable, sustainable source, and we're really focusing on the whole value chain and what happens at end of use, not end of life of those products, I think we have the opportunity to really promote this sort of renewables, future, circular, decarbonized, let's throw all the buzzwords at it, economy. So I think that's where my head is, and I'm hopeful that we can catalyze some change in that space.
Love it. Halide.
I would say what needs to happen is, again, design the processes and products through that lens in the beginning. But there are 3 big enablers of scaling opportunity, I think, for all of us. One is high levels of collaboration. I think we talked a lot about that. Second is the quick adaptation of this by all big economies, so they can actually help us creating with the right regulatory solutions and solve the inconsistencies we see within a country or in between countries and around the borders, just to enable those processes to be very efficient and effective. And the third one is connected to that, looking into short-term dynamics with long-term dynamics, and really understand how to keep an eye on the long-term dynamics and not to be distracted by the short-term challenges you face in this journey.
Excellent. And Garry, a final quick word.
Super quick. I want, just given our focus at Rheaply, I would love to see saving in an organization as easy as procuring is today. And then the second would be to see people like Halide and Sophie, I know that you'll inspire to be the CEOs of companies. I think we need more sustainability leaders and more sustainability trained folks to be leading big organizations.
Fantastic. Well, I think you came in as a fan of both Halide and Sophie. I think that the entire audience are probably big fans of all 3 of you. So thanks so much for joining me for the chat today. And thanks to all of our colleagues at Reuters for inviting us to be here. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Kristen, and thank you, Halide, Sophie, and Garry as well. What a fantastic discussion. Up next, we have a 15-minute session with the CEO of the metals company, Gerard Barron, who will be talking on de-risking the clean energy transition. Enjoy.